Covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Means Report. We appreciate you spending part of your day with us, where today we will honor the fact that 2020 is an election year and try to get you set for huge things ahead as the election season really gets underway. Talking about the primaries that will now begin just in a few weeks. Also, who our expert on hand today thinks the frontrunners will be in the Democratic Party, who might emerge from the pack as we start to try to sort everything out. And of course, the impeachment impact. That's moved forward in the past few days in a big way. And we'll talk about it all with our resident political expert, political scientist at Augusta University, Craig Albert. Dr. Albert, always so kind with his time, especially here as school gets started for the new semester. Thanks for being back.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So I tried to think of what to start with, and so many things have happened since we last met. Let's start with the killing of the Iranian general Soleimani, and whether you think it was a good time for us to take him out, and if that helps make a dent in the war on terror, if you will.
I don't know if it helps the war on terror or not. I think it was a major action of deterrence by the United States. So I question President Trump's timing of it, just because it seems to have been so far away from the time when Soleimani was really active and engaging in building or managing roadside bombs against Iraqi and American troops in Iraq. So it seems a little postponed. But with that said, it took us 10 years to get bin Laden as well. So I mean, how long is too long before you get somebody that's been hurting your soldiers, your troops? But I think the major point we should be considering is that it was a deterrent action, not necessarily towards Iran, but maybe towards North Korea. Targeting this general who was a member of the Iranian state, so a member of the regime, a government official, shows the whole world that the United States will do what it needs to make sure that your regime doesn't overstep its boundaries, and we will take action. And that was a very aggressive and bold move by President Trump to do that.
Look at the Iranian response just a few hours later when they fired a bunch of missiles that did nothing to us. Of course, they took out it looks like a passenger jet, but they didn't do anything to U.S. targets. Do you think they missed on purpose? Absolutely,
they missed on purpose. They had to do something to show the domestic population of Iran that they were going to do something. So they fired about a couple dozen ballistic missiles. We also knew about it well ahead of time, and they knew that we were going to know about it well ahead of time. So we moved and stationed all of our troops, civilians and contractors out of the area, put them in bunkers so we knew that they would be safe. So this is something that Iran had to do for its population, but it did not want to risk escalation with the United States. So if they killed a United States personnel member, that would have forced Donald Trump's hand to escalate even more and perhaps cause a regional war. So I think that Iran backed down, or what we call it, they blinked, knowing that President Trump would probably be the aggressor if they did something that hurt a U.S. personnel member.
How easy is it for the bad guys to replace Soleimani? He was a key figure. He, they say, was planning a lot of attacks on U.S. targets in the near future. Is it next man up? Is it that easy?
It is not that easy. So he was well regarded, well liked by regime officials and by the population. He's been in power for about 20 years, so that's a long time, and he had a legacy. But this is also why the United States was able to target him, because he got sloppy with handling himself and with going out in public, and we could track him very easily. So we've known where he's been for quite a number of years, actually, and he felt safe and secure in his popularity that the United States would never strike him because of how high-ranking he was. So that can't easily be replaced. Neither can his generalship or his commandship. So he was in charge of the Quds forces and was in charge of their unconventional warfare elements as well. So he was in charge of implementing roadside bombs, pretty much, that were responsible for killing about 700 American soldiers during the war in Iraq. So that's a hard person to replace if you look at it from their side, strategic-wise.
We sent a drone over there to kill him. Is this what modern-day warfare looks like, where you don't have to have an assassin hiding in the shadows, just program a drone?
It's special operations forces and drones. That's what the future of warfare is. We're still managing and we're still preparing for conventional warfare on two fronts. So that's what the United States military doctrine is prepared for. So let's say we have to fight North Korea and then Russia gets in the mix. We can still take on two conventional foes at once right now. That's our military doctrine. But we would like to keep it maintained within special operations forces and drone strikes if we can. And President Obama really set that precedent for drone strikes.
We're going to talk about impeachment a little bit later in this broadcast, but do you have any concerns about the timing of the Soleimani killing, that it may have been done by the president to take attention away from impeachment proceedings?
I don't think so. I don't think it was as catchy in the news as that would have needed to be to take away from impeachment. And I actually think President Trump likes being in the news, even with impeachment.
Yeah.
So I don't think he wants to take that away at all. He likes being in the headlines, whether it's good or bad news. He knows that news sells, and he's in the business of selling news.
So even if you thought that he did do it, or if one thought that that is why he made the attack, to call attention away from impeachment, or whether you just don't like him in general, why can't people stand up as one and cheer when a bad guy gets taken out like that? Why can't this be the thing that everybody gets behind, or is that never going to happen?
We're so partisan now.
Yeah.
It's just beyond redoubt. We just can't do that. We are not a unified country anymore. There were some legality concerns with this because of Soleimani being an actual member of the government of Iran and it taking place in a third-party state without that state's permission. So usually we get a request action in Iraq, and we did not do that this time. We didn't do it in Pakistan when we killed bin Laden either. So usually when you go after high-value targets, you don't let the state member know that you're going after those targets, because they'll tell that person that you're going after them. So the legality here is a little bit of what the Democrats are really calling foul on President Trump, that they think he did something illegal according to international law by hitting a regime member. So the United States calls the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which Soleimani was the leader of, a terrorist organization. So according to that, we can go after and attack them without any international norms because he's a terrorist and is a member of the terrorist organization. But the Democrats and lots of international humanitarian experts say that they should not be labeled as a terrorist group. And so that's where the debate really goes on the legality. Is it proper to name a regime military arm a terrorist organization?
Should we fear war with Iran or any other country right now for that matter? Do you think something like that is imminent?
I don't think it's imminent. It scared me a little bit to see what Iran was going to do, but to see how they responded very maturely. They did something to show the United States you can't just do that without having something done back to you, but they didn't escalate, at least yet. We can assume there's some kind of cyber escalation going on that the public doesn't know about right now. We may never know about it, but that's really where Iran wants to target the United States, is in cyberspace. So we can assume that something like that's going on. And I was also expecting some kind of attacks from Hezbollah, perhaps in Israel, or perhaps bases in Iraq or in Lebanon even, against some U.S.-friendly forces over there. But none of that has occurred yet. So I think Iran was really tested, and I think they backed down at the hands of an aggressive Trump. So I don't think they expected him to be that aggressive.
You know, we saw Iranians protesting in the streets, death to America. You see things like that all the time. Why don't, and I'm sure I've asked you this question once in the years that we've known each other, why don't Americans ever take to the streets and say death to Iran? And if we did, what would happen?
It's just it's not a very liberal thing to do. So we're in the business of human rights. I mean liberal as in human rights, as in the philosophy, as in the Enlightenment. That's just not the way American citizens have ever behaved, really. We can think of a few times where that's actually occurred after the death of bin Laden, for instance. They were cheering in protests in front of the White House.
That's right.
And at the World Trade Center site, and there were a few other protests like that. But usually for the American population, even if you think it's a good deed that we've killed a bad guy, you don't really go out there and celebrate it the way other countries do. And you don't want to really elevate the bad guy to that level where your population is out there celebrating the death, because that gives them a lot of credence. It gives them a lot of credibility. So the Americans tend not to do that. We don't want to elevate them. We don't want to make martyrs of them.
The Taliban, ISIS, these organizations have been diminished, certainly in recent years. Who's next for us? Who do we have our sights set on to take out next?
You have to look at cyber terrorists. This is going to be the domain of the next 4 to 6 years. Are remnants of ISIS that have gone and formed the cyber caliphate, and we have to be wary of what they're going to do. to target our critical infrastructure. We know that China and Russia, for instance, have malware in some of our critical infrastructure and could react and shut down a dam or shut down an electrical grid, but we have a deterrent effect against them. So if they do that, we'll do it as well. They don't want that. It's much harder to have a deterrent force against a cyber terrorist online. That's where we don't know what we're going to do. How can we prevent or deter ISIS from targeting these critical infrastructures? I don't think that you can.
When the Means Report continues, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Craig Albert of Augusta University and talk about impeachment. We hit on it briefly in this segment. We'll go more in depth on that. And of course, we'll tackle the 2020 election year and what we can all expect in the coming months on the Means Report. Welcome back to the Means Report. We are covering the hot political topics of the day. Love to dive into these with Dr. Craig Albert, political scientist from Augusta University. Impeachment was another big issue, Dr. Albert, in the headlines in recent days. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, seems intent on making Americans realize that impeachment is a permanent stain on a president's legacy. So I think about presidents who have been impeached, Johnson and Clinton and Trump. I don't necessarily instantly think that they were horrible presidents or that there's a stain. Am I just naive? Is this something that will always make people think less of these men?
I think it ought to make people think less of certain things that they've done in their presidency. The idea is that if you got impeached, you are guilty of committing high crimes and misdemeanors, and that should be a mark upon one's presidency. The problem for President Trump or the environment we live in is that it's so partisan. A lot of people aren't buying the arguments of each side, period. And so it kind of seems, we were talking earlier, like, wow, impeachment is still going on. Like, that's the way the general population of the country feels, is that how is this still going on when you have half the country thinking it's a political ploy, the other half calling impeachment since the day he was inaugurated. So it's a really odd time in American history where the founders meant for impeachment to be a permanent stain, held for the highest crimes that you could possibly think of. And I'm not sure that the general American population believes that that's the case now, or if they do, they don't really care about it or don't think it's that important because he won't get removed in the Senate trial.
You think future lawmakers are going to be quicker to impeach future presidents after this?
Absolutely.
You do?
I think there was not a lot of evidence, or at least they haven't shown a lot of evidence that Trump should be impeached. I think it was a lot of circumstantial evidence based on analysis that it was just circumstantial. They have a lot of hearsay and things of that nature. And if you put that together with the fact that they've been arguing for his impeachment since the day he took over as president, I think the Republicans are going to use that same type of apparatus, that same type of strategy. If a Democrat becomes president and they don't like him or her for some reason, they're going to do the exact same thing. Let's try to impeach him or her and just get rid of him. So I think this was a bad call, I think.
If President Trump wins re-election, will they impeach him again?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if that's constitutionally possible. And I think if he wins re-election, that'll provide a larger, what they call, mandate for his rule. So that would be very unpopular if the Democrats did try to do that.
You know what, though, and this is a theory, you tell me if it's true. 100 years from now, Trump will be listed as a president who was impeached. The history books aren't going to say a whole lot about, yeah, but it was really partisan and they didn't have a ton of evidence. You're just going to think, Trump impeached. And isn't that sort of what Pelosi's saying?
I think so, and that's the way she views it. That's the way a lot of Americans view it. And I view it like that analytically as well. Here was a president that was impeached. That is a stain on our Constitution, on the American Republic, and it is a stain on President Trump. The interesting thing is that Trump is such a great messenger, he's such a great narrator, he doesn't care. And the fact that he doesn't care and he's kind of ignoring the issue is making a lot of his base and Republicans and independents feel the same way, that it's a sham, that it's not real, that nobody really cares. And I think part of that is because he knows that the Republicans in the Senate aren't going to remove him. So it's a stain, but it doesn't really matter unless you get removed from office by the Senate, and that's never happened in American history.
I think at one point you told me that it got to the point where President Trump wanted to be impeached.
I think he did. I think he thinks it's good for his reelection campaign strategy. I think it was poor timing by the Democrats when they did it, and I think they fell into his trap. He was calling for it so that he would have 6 months of a campaign of saying, see, since day one they've been trying to do this, but I wasn't convicted in the Senate, so it was a sham trial. And that's what he's going to do. He's not going to get convicted, and he's going to say because of that it was a sham to be impeached in the first place. And that's going to rile up more people who weren't going to turn out for the presidential election this time to turn out.
I feel like this is the calm before the storm right now as we record this broadcast on a quiet January afternoon. The primaries are about to really ramp up. Do you see a Democrat yet who can be a formidable opponent for Trump?
I think the only person that can beat Trump is Biden. I've said that for 4 years now. I'm still holding to it. Warren is putting on a great campaign. I think it'll come down to Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden fighting it out. But I think at the end of the day, Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee, and it'll be a good fight, a good campaign against President Trump. Both of them had the same rhetoric. Both of them have the same debate style. Joe Biden, of course, is much more involved in the government apparatus for decades, so he has a little bit more experience and hands-on for a longer period of time than does the president. But the president's been the president, and so he can bring all the weight of that office against Biden. So these will be interesting debates.
If it is going to be Biden, and if President Trump realizes that right now, do you think he'll take advantage of this Senate trial portion of impeachment to try to cast as much dispersion on Biden and his family as he can?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, Trump will be at his most Trumpian during this trial. You can look for his tweets to do that. You can look for him calling attention against anything that any Democratic candidate running for president is doing that Trump doesn't like. He's going to be loud and he's going to be ferocious right now. And that's what he wants to do, because being that way gets him more attention, free attention, we should say, in the media. And that name recognition and calling attention that he is president gets more people out to the polls, even in his favor.
How long do we have to wait before we will really know a front runner? I know the Democratic convention is coming up, I think, in June. When will we have a feel for it, and when will the Democrats say, okay, time to get behind one person?
We'll know by April for sure. Yes, even though the convention won't be until June, I think we'll have a clear front runner by April.
What happens to the rest of the folks who did well, the Warrens and the Sanders of this world? Do they just hold out hope for cabinet jobs?
Perhaps, or vice president jobs. So I think that's what some might be looking out for, is to side with one of the two primary candidates right now, hoping that in return they'll get a VP nod.
I always like to give props to your students when I'm interviewing you, and I want to ask you now, are they into impeachment? Are they following this? And not because you assign them to. Do they care?
I think they do care, and I think more than anything they care about the divisiveness of the entire process. So they see this as something sad for America, period. Regardless on whether they're pro-Trump or never Trump, or they're Democrats, they see this as this process as kind of a strain to the Constitution, and they feel sad that half the country is against the other half, and there's not much that will unify us. That's what I'm hearing most from my students.
What about the deal that was just reached, a preliminary deal between the U.S. and China to get trade back on track? The tariffs, they say, may go away in the next phase of this deal. Is that a good sign for our economy, and do you see this as a permanent solution?
I don't know if it's a permanent solution. It is a good temporary short-term sign for our economy, but economists are pointing that we're teetering very closely to a recession. So President Trump needs to make good on all of his trade deals that he promised the American population when he became president, to make sure that we don't go into a recession, because that type of economic, not meltdown, but partial slowdown is imminent. It's due. It should be coming up just based on the political election cycle of the economy, of the political economic cycle.
Simon Metcalf of Augusta University says Augusta shouldn't expect one this year. I kind of breathed a sigh of relief. He said at least the Augusta metro area gets through this year without a recession. So does President Trump just need a good economy until November? And you think, I don't want to get you to predict yet, but do you think that's going to be hugely in his favor if the economy stays strong?
Well, it goes two ways. The stock markets are strong, the industrial indexes are strong, but I'm not sure the typical American voter's pocketbook is strong. I'm not sure if the average typical blue-collar worker that voted usually Democrat, but voted for Trump this time for their personal income and their household income, I'm not sure how much happier or wealthier they are right now. And so those people that voted for him in the hopes of seeing an increase in their paycheck might not turn out to vote for him this time because it hasn't been as expansive as he made it out to be. So he would have to have something fantastic happen in the next 6 to 8 months to change that person's mind that expected a lot but isn't feeling a large impact.
I meant to ask you this when we were talking about Biden versus Trump. Do debates make a difference? Do voters make decisions after they watch those debates? Are they swayed?
Most of the time, no. You're already made up before you watch those debates. But just for entertainment value, that will be a debate I would pay money to see.
No question. You have to watch those debates, no matter who versus who it is. Probably last question, what about an October surprise? Do you see that coming? It seems like every 4 years, the party that's trying to get in unveils something at the 11th hour. Will that happen again?
I don't know how we could have anything unveiled against Trump by the Democrats because everything has been unveiled against Trump since he's been elected. I think what you're likely to see is Trump take some kind of aggressive action overseas or announce some killing of a high-value target or something to that effect to bolster his foreign policy credentials. And that's the weakest area where I think Biden will be able to challenge Trump is Trump pulled out of Syria, Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. Trump has done a lot of, they can question the killing of Soleimani. So he's done a lot of questionable things in the foreign policy realm, and that's where Joe Biden is very strong. So I would look for that type of scenario to play out where Trump does something to make his foreign policy credentials more credible.
I heard that Georgia's going to be key in this whole thing. You still think Georgia's going to be a big player?
I still don't think it's as purple as most analysts say it is, but I think it's growing and growing more towards that. So I think it's still going to go pretty favorably, 4 to 6% towards Republicans, towards Trump. But I think this might be the last year we see that rate of advantage for Republicans. Look for 2024 to be a solidified purple state.
But still nonstop political ads on TV in Georgia, right?
Get used to it.
I mean, it's going to be just nonstop. Craig Albert, thanks for what you do for our community and for this program. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And you'll be, our political guy through this whole season, right?
I look forward to it.
Yeah, no, me too. The viewers do as well. You help us understand all these complicated issues.